Hello everyone, it's History Behind the Warrior, and welcome back to yet another video. Now, seeing as we have been doing a lot of Injustice content recently, with the news of a possible third installment and sequel on the horizon, I thought that today we could have a fun and pretty demoralizing trip down memory lane, covering every single character death in the Injustice universe, both in the games and in the comics. Now, if you remember correctly, I did kind of make a video like this a fair few years back, but since then, a lot has changed and occurred, with two spin-off comics, that being a prequel and sequel comic, as well as an entirely new game. So going into this, please do consider this a much needed update video, which adds a lot of newer bodies and individuals to the kill count. And Jesus, did they smoke a lot of people since I've been gone. But going into this, I do kind of have some rules with the characters I'm gonna cover and mention here, because I'll only be featuring well-known established individuals. So I'm largely gonna be avoiding unnamed civilians, or casualties that kind of play a minor role. And I will also include characters here that have died, but do later return down the line, such as Green Arrow for an example. Because whilst they do appear on the roster and are playable, it does not diminish that at some point in time, in some way, shape and form, that they did technically die. Plus, to kind of clear things up, I know there's some characters that have died differently in game to that of the comics, thus to not overcomplicate things, as they've never been clarified, I will be mentioning both interpretations of their death, as we don't know which one is truly canon. Plus, hey, it's my list. And of course, heads up, possible spoilers ahead if you haven't read the comics. So you have been warned. Now to do this, I will strictly be going through this kill count with the universe's continuity instead of that of the release continuity. It just allows for the video to flow a little bit better and prevents us from jumping all over the place, as there's like 8 different tie-in comics here. And also, I do want to highlight and plug that considering the subject matter I am going to talk about, there is a really large likelihood that YouTube's probably gonna flag and screw this video over in the algorithm. So please, by all means, give this video a thumbs up, as well as try the new weird hype mechanic thing, as it will greatly help out both the video and the channel as a whole. So anyway, with that said, let's get the ball rolling on this, and starts with the Injustice 2 annual Wonder Woman prequel, with our first victim on this list here being Steve Trevor. Now to somewhat add context to these scenes, as well as the events that led to his demise, the annual itself does take place prior to the events of World War II, serving as both an origin story and retelling for Diana's first encounter with man. And of course, much like the comics, upon Diana learning about the war, she would leave Themyscira, believing that love and compassion could be utilized to stop the Nazis, tearing her way across battlefields in order to protect the world of man. And of course, this would inevitably lead to a romance between herself and Trevor. But upon returning back to Themyscira to acquire the lasso, it is revealed through its truth-telling capabilities that Steve Trevor was not the American hero he pretended to be, that he was secretly a Nazi in disguise, posing as an American in order to steal Diana's lasso of truth, having Diana's very appearance and presence be the perfect disguise to hide in plain sight. Thus, this understandably breaks Diana's heart, tainting and tarnishing her perception of man. So as punishment for his crimes, Diana would decapitate Steve Trevor with the lasso, squeezing it around his neck till his head literally popped off. So this now takes us onto the prequel comic book series, Injustice 0. Now with us jumping back to that of the past, before the formation of the Justice League, there was the Justice Society of America, which actually now takes us onto our first casualty of this list here, Hawkman. The first canonical death during the flashback sequence of this comic book line. Here, Carter and his wife Shiera are in pursuit of a sacred medallion belonging to Aphosis, a being of pure chaos. During a confrontation with the god, as it does temporarily possess Hawkgirl, the fight would spill out onto a battlefield, where he would also possess a platoon and gun down Carter where he stood, successful in spreading some madness into the world. But the death of her beloved shattered Apophis's grip, letting her get free, but ultimately at the cost of Hawkman's life. Johnny Thunder, having played a very small role in the comics here, and barely even featured at all honestly. Johnny would become the next possessed host of the Chaos God, having him turn against his allies during the climax of the war, unfortunately resulting in his untimely demise, effectively killed by his own friends upon the deity's defeat. The Sandman, whilst much like Johnny, having played a very minor role in the comics here, Wesley in the present would be the first of the Justice Society to fall to his hand, as the deity had possessed the Green Lantern, Alan Scott, to stab and kill his friend. So this now takes us onto our last and final casualty of the Year Zero comic book line, and that is Jay Garrick of the Justice Society, having also fallen under the influence of Apophis, who was working alongside the Joker. Jay was forced to do many horrific things against his will, completely obliterating a pupil of Wildcat, and killing dozens of innocents, as the Joker abused his abilities with the Speed Force, whilst wielding a blade. And just before Jay could regain his senses and shake off the Joker, the Clown Prince of Crime would force the Speedster to run head-on directly into a wall, completely obliterating the first Flash. So, this now takes us onto the main continuity of comics, starting with the Year 1 line of Casualties, Jimmy Olsen. Having made a very brief appearance in the very first issue, Jimmy can be seen assisting and escorting Lois to a crime scene in order to snag some photos. But it's here where they learn very quickly it's a ploy made by the Joker, who mercilessly executes Jimmy where he stands, shooting him right through the lens of his camera and understandably out the other side of his head. Lois Lane, a victim of extreme foul play on the Joker's hand, having been captured by both him and Quinn with a detonator strapped to her heart. Knowing that this would catch the attention of Clark Kent, Joker would have the room they operated on her in be filled with a unique and extremely dangerous combination of kryptonite and Scarecrow's fear toxin. So when a panicked Superman found Lois, all he actually saw was Doomsday, and to prevent any devastation, he would take the diabolical beast into the atmosphere, but by the time he enters space, is where he comes to the horrible realization of the mistake he just made, unintentionally killing both Lois, as well as his unborn child. Which now takes us onto a handful of deaths, as Lois's end started a snowball effect that killed a number of different Titans in Metropolis, being caught in a nuclear blast. And this included the likes of Jesse Quick, Kid Flash, Steel, as well as Beast Boy, all gone in the blink of an eye. Now our next death here, and the somewhat inciting incident that sows division in the League, is the Joker. Having been confronted by an enraged Superman during Batman's interrogation, Clark would plunge his fist through the heart of the Clown Prince of Crime, ending his life instantly. Nightwing, arguably one of the most tragic deaths on this list here. Dick Grayson, aka Nightwing, aka the First Robin, would be called in alongside the Bat family to Arkham Asylum, looking to stop Superman from casting judgment on Bruce's rogue gallery. And of course, as expected, this would lead to a massive brawl to break out on all sides. But during this jailbreak, Nightwing wouldn't fall to one of the villains, but that of Damian Wayne himself, having thrown a baton at his head, which, mind you, he does normally catch, but knocks him out unconscious, having him fall back on a slab of stone in just the right place, but it does snap his neck, delivering a very swift and very sad end to the lost Grayson. However, whilst physically gone, it is worth mentioning that he does exist on the astral plane, as during the events of the third year of comic books, he would return as the new Dead Man. Thus, Dick Grayson does exist, just on not that of the mortal plane. Kalibak, sent by his father Darkseid to conquer the world of man in his name, Kalibak would lead a devastating assault with his parademons on Earth, killing tens of thousands of people all across the globe. So in order to stop the slaughter, Superman saw only one solution to these problems: to overpower the god and take his life, resulting in Kalibak having his head be beaten into the ground. Martian Manhunter. Now this one is a bit more ambiguous considering the nature of it, but John Jones was the first to fall in the League, as he directly stood against the hand of Superman and Wonder Woman, knowing exactly where their tyranny would lead. And when he is attacked by Wonder Woman, he would act in self-defense to fend her off, morphing inside her body and slowly shutting her system down. So, with no other option left, Clark is forced to incinerate Wonder Woman's body, forcing John Jones out her body and to his presumed death. And the reason I say presumed is that he does actually feature as DLC in the first Injustice game, where it's revealed that following these events, he would actually go into hiding in Atlantis, later freeing those that stood against the regime in order to form a new Justice League. However, the reason why I am featuring him here is that despite his appearance as DLC, he is actually not seen, heard of, or mentioned in Injustice 2. So we don't know up to what extent, but we could consider his DLC inclusion as canon. But even so, I do absolutely think he's worth a mention here. Captain Atom. With Superman's regime having spiraled out of control, the US government would send out their biggest gun to work alongside Batman, naturally pitting him against the likes of Superman. And honestly, for a while, it does look like Captain Atom does have the upper hand, overpowering the last son of Krypton, until Wonder Woman does intervene, striking him in the neck with her magical blade to stop him. However, Diana was not aware that this cut had in fact breached his contamination field. As you see, within Captain Atom is the power of that of 10 nuclear bombs. Their skin was simply the one thing keeping it all contained. So by Diana doing this, not only had she signed Captain Atom's death certificate, but put everyone in close proximity in danger. So with his death more or less sealed, he would attempt to take both Superman and Wonder Woman out at the same time. Yet his death would ultimately be in vain. Green Arrow. Arguably one of the most unjustified deaths in the series. During Batman's infiltration of Superman's Fortress of Solitude, he had unknowingly entered the facility, completely unaware that the Kents had been placed there for their protection. So Clark, seeing his parents in danger, would understandably take it as a personal attack. But what actually leads to Ollie's death is when a stray arrow bounces off Superman's chest, piercing Jonathan Kent's shoulder. A complete accident by all means. But in the heat of the moment, Clark would be engulfed by his anger and brutally beat Green Arrow to death, even despite his parents' pleas to stop. Although this isn't the end of Green Arrow in the series as a whole, it is still a pretty grisly end. Which now takes us into the events of Year 2, starting with Kyle Rayner, having to have unfortunately been the very first Green Lantern to fall. As finally on his way back to Earth following a very long mission, Kyle would cross paths with Sinestro and his Corps, whom at the time had been overseeing the fall of Superman. And by chance and or fate, Kyle would simply be at the wrong place at the wrong time. So Sinestro, seeing him as a threat later down the line, would instead opt to remove him immediately, having him be restrained, and then stripped from his ring as he's torn apart. Chip. During a standoff between the Green Lantern Corps and the regime, Chip is forced to use his Neek abilities to stop him and prevent the synapses from inside his brain from firing, making it easy for the Lantern Corps to take him into custody. But just as they are about to do so, Sinestro would intervene, firing a dart through the head of the Squirrel, killing him immediately. Desperado. The next death here would actually be from a form of foul play by the hand of Sinestro, who had Desperado kidnapped by his Corps and tossed to Earth under the guise that he was attacking the planet. Thus, seeing this as an opportunity to gain the favor of Superman, Sinestro would publicly kill Desperado, making it look like he was forced to snap his neck. Arquillo. With tension rising between the Green Lantern Corps and the regime, a final battle would take place, with the Sinestro Corps now aligned with Superman. And during this siege, Arquillo would actually be one of the very first to fall, caught in a massive beam and blast by the planet Green Lantern, Mogo, incinerated within seconds. Commissioner Gordon. Whilst not involved in the grander narrative of the overall story, Gordon at the start of this year is diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. So on death's doorstep and seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, the Commissioner would do his best to fight the soldiers of Superman's regime on the street level, protecting those he loved until his last and final breath, even knocking out the likes of Cyborg to keep Barbara's identity as Oracle protected. John Stewart. During the finale and climax of this Lantern War, John would unfortunately be seduced by the honey words of Sinestro, one that urges him to willingly give up and yield, of which John actually does consider. So with his guard lowered, Sinestro would take this opportunity to literally stab him in the back. Guy Gardner. In the heat of the battle, and poisoned by the ring and influence of Sinestro, Hal would immediately attack his former friend and ally. And despite Guy's pleas, even refusing to fight him, Hal would give in to his darker temptations, literally ripping off his ring arm and stripping him of his power as he plummeted to the earth, dead on arrival. Ganfet and Mogo. With Superman having been granted a yellow ring of power, he had become nigh unstoppable, as his attempted execution of Black Canary was live-streamed, empowering his ring with fear across the globe. It elevated him to a form of power that the Corps had never seen. So by utilizing both the power of the ring as well as his Kryptonian heritage, Clark is able to manhandle Ganfet, driving him into the heart and core of Mogo, before then pushing literally the two of them into the sun, leaving them as nothing more than dust and echoes. So this now does take us into year 3 of the comics here, with the first two to fall being Dr. Occult and Rose Psychic, with the two being approached by Batman to neutralize the likes of both Raven and Wonder Woman. And whilst they are successful in this endeavor, it would come at a great cost, as Dr. Occult would perish to the likes of Raven, causing their bond to somewhat unravel. You see, the duo were bound to each other in a singular body, so when Occult was killed, that meant that Rose was actually on borrowed time. And now we have a plethora of different deaths on our hand here, with Jason Blood, Harvey Bullock, Ragman, and Deadman all having been seemingly slain by the Spectre, who at the start of year 3 is revealed to be aligned with Superman. But little do we actually know that the powerful space imp, Mr. Mxyzptlk, had actually taken claim and control over the Vengeful Spirit, using disguise to protect Superman. So when he finds members of Batman's insurgency, he would obliterate Harvey Bullock and Jason Blood, literally shred Ragman alive like paper, and even kill the likes of Deadman himself, slashing him with his astral sword, finally putting Boston Brand to rest. The Phantom Stranger. Understandably, such actions and favoritism would draw the attention of a fellow great deity, with the Stranger himself questioning the Spectre's motives. But as this conversation drags on, the Phantom Stranger realizes that this isn't quite the Spectre he once knew. No, this was someone else. And whilst he does try to stop him, the Stranger was simply not ready for the Spectre's elevated power, being impaled by the imp, with no one even aware of his fall. Clarion, the Witch Boy of the Dark Arts, would join the insurgency during the course of year 3, assisting wherever he was needed. But such a decision would inevitably lead to his death, as leading up to the final battle in the Tower of Fate, he would actually be slain by Sinestro, literally blasted by a beam of fear. Which also does take us onto Detective Chimp. Unfortunately, having been bound to that of Clarion, much like Dr. Occult and Rose Psychic in that regard, with his anchors somewhat gone, he would sadly slip into the ether. The Huntress. Huntress's death is a very sad one, because with the fight between the regime and insurgency having spilled onto that of the mortal plane, with the literal fabric of reality itself being torn asunder, in the heat of this battle, where Diana is battling the duo of Batwoman and the Huntress, in a desperate attempt to restrain one of them, Diana would cast out her lasso to hold the Huntress, only to greatly underestimate the toss. So when she tugged on the thread, it would not be around Helena's body, but actually her neck, resulting in a very grisly end for her. So with year 3 concluded, this now takes us up into the events of year 4, with the first to fall being Renee Montoya. And during the start of this comic, it's very clear that Renee is in a very bad place, having grown to detest the actions of the regime, as well as the incompetency of the insurgency. Because of this, she would actually lead a one-woman assault against Superman's forces, taking literal handfuls of kryptonite-enhanced pills, putting her on par with the likes of even Superman. And for a while, she does actually hold her own against the Man of Steel. But these pills do take a toll as she overdoses on them, collapses in Clark's hands. Hercules. Now this one is admittedly a bit out of nowhere, but the rise of the regime naturally causes friction with the gods of Olympus, having seen Superman's rule as a god as unjust, and honestly, inhumane considering his origins. Thus, seeing him as unfit to rule, they initially planned to exile Superman until the challenge rises that judgment through combat would allow him to stay, but the gods and the insurgency would use this to their advantage, pitting Diana against Superman, with the Amazon nearly defeating Clark until Sinestro interfered. With the contest ruined, this would invoke the wrath of the gods, launching a brutal assault from Hercules himself, who manhandles Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, Shazam, and Superman. Clark gets so desperate that he is actually forced to flee the planet, just so he can absorb enough sunlight to plummet back to the Earth like a meteor and deliver the killing blow to Hercules. Desard, with the war between the gods and Superman's regime actually having been orchestrated by both Ares and Darkseid, the last son of Krypton would leave Earth and travel all the way to Apokolips to brawl with the new god, looking to kill him for his hand in this. And this battle very quickly spirals out of hand, as the blows they're dealing to each other actually shakes the core of Apokolips itself, forcing Desard to plead towards his master to stop. But these words only infuriate the god, who quickly turns his gaze towards Desard and kills him in a single swift blast. Artemis, our last and final casualty of Year 4, in the regime's final stand against the gods of Olympus, Hera would finally take this opportunity to kill her rival, Hippolyta, the Queen of the Amazons, as the goddess herself had never forgiven her for her infidelity with Zeus that led to the birth of Diana, being a constant living reminder of those events. Thus, seeing this as the perfect opportunity to strike, Hera would fire a beam at Hippolyta, only for Artemis to intervene and push the queen out the way, taking the blow and sacrificing her life. So this now does take us onto Year 5. And well, this one sucks, because our first individual to fall in Year 5 is actually Kilowog, as during a jailbreak caused by Plastic Man, who is looking for his son, he would attempt to cause a distraction by claiming a number of Green Lantern rings, throwing them out into the prison in the hopes of restoring whatever was left of the core here. Yet, just before that ring can land on his finger, he would be shot through the heart by the likes of Sinestro, marking a really sad end to this character as we know it. Parasite. With Superman's regime now in full control, it's here where the Man of Steel takes a more totalitarian approach to stopping criminals, with Parasite being the very first victim of that. Because whilst he's causing some havoc against Green Lantern and Cyborg in Coast City, Superman sweeps him off his feet and immediately tosses him into the sun, brutally killing Parasite. Now, following these events, we do have a number of different deaths here, all at the hand of the childish and very naive Bizarro, having killed multiple members of the Rogues, as he vaporizes Heatwave and Weather Wizard with his heat vision, and then Trickster by actually befriending him and then accidentally dropping him from the sky, leaving him as a scattered carcass in the middle of a desert. And as a somewhat honorable mention to tie up the Rogues here, Golden Glider. While she only very briefly appears in Year 5, it is actually mentioned in Injustice 2, but Golden Glider was one of the villains executed by the regime publicly by none other than the hand of Wonder Woman, Bizarro. Now, the antics of Superman's clone could only go on for so long before he did cross paths with Clark. And Superman, wanting to understand just who exactly was responsible for his creation, would set out to hunt him down. Now, at this point in time too, Bizarro was on a path of self-discovery, wanting to understand who he was and where he actually came from. So this naturally actually took him to the Fortress of Solitude. Yet, he had not accounted that upon entering the fortress, he would cross paths with a very recently brainwashed Doomsday, who was able to trade blows with the clone before inevitably overpowering him and breaking his neck, marking an end to Bizarro. Alfred Pennyworth, having become a thorn in Superman's side since Year 1, especially after Alfred beat his ass. Alfred's ties to both Bruce and Damian made him a threat in his eyes, as he believed that his influence over Batman's ward tainted his trust in the Man of Steel. Thus, seeking to hurt both Bruce and gain a deeper connection with Damian, the Man of Steel would unleash the serial killer Victor Zsasz to hunt down and kill the elderly man. And whilst he did most certainly put up a fight, it simply wasn't enough, becoming yet another victim of Victor. Now, keep in mind that whilst he does return in the Injustice 2 comic book run, he still did most certainly die here. King Shark. Now, during the course of Year 5, is where the regime starts to recruit supervillains into their ranks, with them being utilized to detain and restrain anyone that stood against the regime. Which actually takes us to that of the Flash, because Barry Allen's beloved would fall into the crosshairs of the regime, being apprehended by King Shark and Gerda. Now, understandably, Barry's not happy that this has happened, and he does attempt to calm the situation, only to spark the ire of Iris. Now, Shark, seeing this as her resisting arrest, would take a far more direct and physical approach to stop her, forcing Barry to throw a broom at the Shark at such speeds that it accidentally goes in his mouth and outside the back of his head. Hawkman. Now, during the initial split of the League into its two factions, the Hawks would actually depart from Earth, not wishing to be involved in the affairs of the regime and insurgency, instead choosing to remain on Thanagar until such events did conclude. But despite their promise to one another, Hawkgirl would return back to Earth without telling her husband. And despite the situation that is there, Shiara actually chooses to remain by Clark's side, which does piss off Carter, who, might I add, is extremely controlling and abusive towards his wife, with the two even clashing during the comics and separating on bitter terms. Yet Carter is far from defeated, and seeing Superman as the one responsible for taking his wife, he would travel all the way into the depths of space to take the kryptonite from inside Mongol's ring, forging a mace out of it to battle Superman. And it does actually look to be a one-sided battle, as his bloodlust very quickly takes over, until his mace is taken away from him. So with no weapon in hand, he would be overpowered and killed, marking a current end for Hawkman, Victor Zsasz. Now this one should come as no surprise at all, because after what he did to Alfred, it was only a matter of time before he got his just desserts. As once he was incarcerated by the regime, Damian would take this opportunity to quite literally kill him by 1,000 cuts, going over every scar engraved on his body to slowly bleed him out before he slit his throat. Now, it is also worth noting and mentioning that we do get a somewhat recounting of these events during the first chapter of Injustice 2, where the events that happen there are actually very different from that of the comics, as the Arkham Asylum sequence and Victor Zsasz's death are kind of blended into one sequence here. Now, it's very possible that this could be a soft retcon, but it's also very likely possible that due to these events being told from Bruce's perspective, it's probably simply just how he recounts these events. Plus, we probably needed a bit of dramatic flair for the first opening chapter of the game. Metamorpho. Assigned to protect the regime's most delicate information, Metamorpho would be pitted against the likes of Deathstroke, who in turn had also been assigned the mission of retrieving said sensitive data. So the two would cross paths and battle each other, with Deathstroke gaining the upper hand, outsmarting Metamorpho by firing 2 bullets into the back of his skull, right into his blind spot. Batwoman. In the grand finale of Year 5, where Bruce realizes that the only way to save this world is by pulling in a Justice League from another timeline, Kate would effectively be the bridge that unites these two worlds together, as the controls for the bridge are damaged due to Superman's siege, and she herself sacrifices her life to be the anchor for it. But her last moments are truly quite terrifying, because whilst they are able to do this, at the very same moment, Clark Kent would catch on to what is going on, striking Kate with a full blast from his eyes, as the worlds are merged together, marking an apparent end for Batwoman. So this now takes us up to the game itself, Injustice: Gods Among Us, and we do have 2 canonical deaths here. The first being Lex Luthor, who during the entire time has been effectively working as a double spy of sorts, working directly under Clark's nose, under the guise of him being his best friend. In fact, it would actually be Lex's funds that does keep the insurgency afloat. But as the years passed by, and Clark got more and more reckless, Lex would have a contingency plan of his own to stop the Man of Steel, utilizing a power suit in the hopes of stopping him. But when the day of reckoning arrived, he was not quite as prepared as he had hoped to have been, with his suit effectively having been shut down, to then be incapacitated by Clark, who tears him right out of his suit and strangles him to death, with all of the world to see. Which does take us on to our next death here, and you know who's on this list. Shazam. Because after seeing Clark's actions, Billy would challenge Clark's stance on the regime and how things were very quickly spiraling out of control. Seeing this as insubordination though, Shazam's words would quickly be shut down, with his mouth frozen shut, and his brain effectively being liquidated through his eyes, killing the young Billy Batson, and being the last time we do see a Captain Marvel in this universe. Thus, this now brings us into the tie-in comic for Injustice 2, and I will say, oh my god, there are so many deaths here. Amanda Waller and Rick Flag. Upon the defeat of Superman and the return of the US government, it looks like Amanda Waller would take this opportunity in the power vacuum to capture and incapacitate as many former villains as possible into her new Suicide Squad. Little did she actually know though, that the entire time she was doing this, her presence would be monitored by the League of Assassins, with Jason Todd, under the guise of Batman, infiltrating the Pentagon where the Suicide Squad was, and gunning both her and Rick Flag down in seconds. And of course, once again, we have a number of different names that add to our kill count here. Because at this point, Todd is effectively in control of the Suicide Squad. But he doesn't need every single member here, detonating the bombs in the heads of the Clock King, Magpie, Polka Dot Man, and Killer Moth, delivering a pretty brutal end to the Suicide Squad that never quite came to be. Ted Kord, aka Blue Beetle, having been semi-retired in this timeline by the events of the comics. Here, Ted serves as a sort of mentor for his successor, the new Blue Beetle, Jaime Reyes, teaching him how to handle his scarab and the power behind it. Now, from the amassed wealth he does retain, despite the events of the first game, this does actually put him into the crosshairs of Ra's al Ghul. Knowing that such a man could pose a threat to his own uprising, he would have Ted be kidnapped and publicly executed by Orca and Killer Croc. El Diablo, having been a part of Ra's New World Order, as well as one of the individuals enslaved under his will, as he was a member of the Suicide Squad. Once Ra's secret headquarters are infiltrated, El Diablo would be pitted against the likes of the new Blue Beetle, overpowering the youth in their first encounter. But with his untempered strength still not being controlled, Beetle is very easily able to overpower the Pyromancer, causing his core to become unstable, leading to a ginormous explosion that annihilates the facility. Red Robin, aka Tim Drake. After the events of Metropolis, a small fragment of the Titans remained alive following these horrific events, being composed of Superboy, Red Robin, Starfire, and Wonder Girl. And it's revealed during a tie-in comic that during the course of these 6 years, the Titans would actually be sealed away within that of the Phantom Zone, due to Superman having nearly accidentally killed Superboy. But with the fall of the regime, the Titans would naturally finally be set free, with Bruce finally reunited with Tim. But this happiness would only be for a very brief moment, as the opening of the Phantom Zone projector had attracted the interest of General Zod, who used this opportunity to slip free and announce his presence by overpowering Plastic Man and shooting Tim right through the heart. General Zod. Now, blood did demand blood, and the death of Robin rattled Bruce in ways he hadn't felt since the death of Dick Grayson. So with his contingency plan in place, he would suit up in a power suit and go one-on-one with Zod, exposing him to the very same fear toxin infused kryptonite that the Joker had used on Superman. And for a while, it did look like Bruce had the advantage, but it was only for a brief moment as the effects of this gas would slowly wear off. But enough damage had been done, as once an Amazo arrived, who was ordered by Ra's to eliminate him, the Kryptonian stood absolutely no chance against him, being overpowered and having his head quite literally be torn off his shoulders here. Ray Palmer, aka the Atom. With the death of Zod, Ra's would have the Amazo be sent on a killing spree across the globe, with Batman and his new league attempting to stop him. But they greatly underestimate the sheer vast power of this unit, being able to manhandle the likes of Superboy, Black Adam, and even Wonder Woman. Because of this, Ray Palmer would attempt to shut it down from inside, only to be overwhelmed by the nanites in its system. Here, they overpower him and cut off his leg, before seemingly tearing him to shreds off panel. Professor Ivo, the creator of Amazo and yet another member of Raish's inner circle. Ivo was completely appalled at what he had created, how it had been utilized and weaponized to kill innocents, instead of being utilized as a means of a last resort. In fact, Ivo had only been working under Raish in the hopes of saving and freeing his family. But after learning the truth that they were long dead, Ivo would turn against the Ghul, trying to shut down the Amazo, but dying in his efforts to do so, as he would be shot in the head by Damien's sister, Athanasia Ghul. Amazo, having been crippled by Professor Ivo's coding, and greatly worn down from his fights with the League, when faced by Supergirl and Blue Beetle on the moon, he would finally be stopped in his tracks, overwhelmed by the Kryptonian's power, as his face is lasered off, and he is frozen before then being decapitated, marking an end to this ruthless android, Animal Man. As Raish's inner circle began to crumble from within, former hero and believer of the demon's vision would finally turn against the Ghul, finding his methods to be disgusting, as it shed the blood of so many innocents, and for what? Whilst he did play a hand in stopping the Amazo, he would pay the ultimate price, being captured by Poison Ivy, and then shot in the head, presumably by Deadshot. Tomar Ray. After the defeat of Gan-Fett by the hands of Superman, the Green Lantern Corps largely avoided getting in contact with Earth again, instead choosing to rebuild its forces and lick its wounds until the defeat of the Kryptonian. But such weakened forces opened up a power vacuum in the universe, with the Red Lanterns having risen to fill it, and Tomar would be the first to fall to their hand, as whilst exploring the planet Arissa, a prison world where they took the detained, he would be blindsided by Dexter, who would slash his throat open. Hagor, with tensions rising on the planet, during a confrontation with the Red Lanterns, and the imprisoned Hal Jordan and Sinestro, led by their jailer Sonarik, one of the Green Lanterns, Jimwick, would take this opportunity to fend off the Red Corps, and shoot Hagor in the side of the head, taking him out near instantly. Now, with Sinestro's escape back to Oa, Atrocitus would take this opportunity to lead a ginormous siege against the Green Lantern homeworld, attacking the Corps, and even granting the likes of Starro a Red Lantern ring to all but guarantee his victory, using his abilities of mind control to corrupt not just the Green Lanterns themselves, but even one of the Guardians, Sade. Under his control, he would force her to disintegrate 3 Green Lanterns in a flick of her wrist, killing Chaslon, Vandor, and Bideg. Sinestro. With the war taken to Oa, and the Green Lanterns desperately running out of options, Sinestro would offer to take up a Lantern Ring, but not out of the sole purpose of working with the Corps itself, but instead to save that of Sonarik. Whilst she was his jailer, she was also his daughter, so by being aligned with the Green Lanterns, he would be able to save her as she'd fallen under the influence of Starro, being able to peel the parasite from her face, but not before it makes her stab her father. Here, the two share a very brief moment between each other, before the former Yellow Lantern finally perishes. Vion. Whilst a definite minor villain in the grand scale of the overarching narrative, Vion would actually be one of the first individuals in the entire cosmos to cross paths with Brainiac, having encountered his foot soldiers, but with no interest in him, as he was being chased by Superboy and Wonder Girl. Vion would very quickly be dispatched by the cyborgs, having a fist blow through the side of his temple. Booster Gold. Now this is a particularly sad one for me to include, because in order to stop Starro, Jaime comes to learn that the only way to do it is to effectively sacrifice the Scarab to kill it, sacrificing his own life for the greater good, and leaving him absent, floating in the void of space. But after being entrusted with Jaime from Ted, Booster knows that to honor his friend's legacy, he must save Jaime, abandoning his oxygen mask to the young man and allowing him to succumb to the depths of space. And it's actually during this process where he would kind of be reunited with Ted, albeit a version of him from a time unknown, but one that does comfort him in his final moments. Man-Bat. Having been a member of the Suicide Squad during the Grand Siege of Gorilla City, where Grodd is able to lay claim and control of the Suicide Squad's detonators, the first casualty under his thumb would be Langstrom himself, as he tried to attack Grodd completely unaware of what he held in his hand. so Grodd would blow his head off as an example to the rest of the squad, who he effectively now put under his thumb. Solivar, having been a major figure alongside Ra's al Ghul, as they were partners in crime for this new world order, Solivar constantly had friction and gripes with that of Grodd, even resulting in the gorilla being exiled as he continued to defy his orders to make him look weak. However, after Grodd aligned himself with Brainiac, and his psychic inhibitors were removed, with the Suicide Squad under his thumb, and the siege all but successful, Grodd would force Lawton to shoot Solivar in the head, ending his reign in a single gunshot. Ra's al Ghul, the last and final casualty of this comic book line, with Gorilla City conquered, his partner slain, and his Suicide Squad turned against him, Ra's was at the mercy of Grodd himself, who could all but laugh and lie in the back of his throne. With victory in his grasp, he would choose to baptize it by killing Ra's, forcing him to put his head in his hand as he completely obliterated his skull, marking a bloody end for the demon. Thus concludes the events of the comics, taking us right into the events of the game itself. And funny enough, the first casualty would be Grodd himself, as once his ties to Brainiac are revealed, he is effectively seen as the general of this invasion. So, with a newly formed Justice League put together, with the regime and insurgency now working in tandem, when they lead a direct assault against him, Grodd's forces simply do not stand a chance, as the gorilla himself is pitted against the likes of Black Adam and Aquaman. His hubris would prove to be his undoing, as his arrogance is greatly misplaced, underestimating the duo and resulting in his defeat and death by the hands of Aquaman. And our last and final kill of this video would be that of Dr. Fate. The servant of Nabu would be corrupted by the gods of order, believing that after all of this chaos in the world sown by the regime and insurgency, that Brainiac may finally be the one to restore order. So, in the game's finale, Dr. Fate would face the world's finest and be defeated by the duo, with the helmet being crushed and Kent finally released of the God of Order's influence. But with his use to Brainiac effectively gone, the 12th level intellect being would impale him with one of the spiral tendrils from the ship itself, being pulled into the vessel as he slowly dies. And like that, everyone, this has been it for every current known and recorded death in the Injustice universe. And wow, this was a lot to digest, my god. Now again, keep in mind, I didn't feature every possible character here, especially the lesser known ones, or faceless casualties, but I did want to include individuals that I would deem to be important to the narrative of Injustice, or at the very least, have a name to their face, as the DC universe itself is so incredibly vast and wide, with Injustice using a lot of lesser known characters in the series. Thus, with my coverage here, and news and rumours looming on the horizon of a third Injustice game, I do hope that this is all giving you a bit of an idea of who can and can't come back in the series moving forward, and who you can probably expect to see on the release roster for this game. But hey, even with that said, no death here is ever really permanent. That's kind of the magic of comics, and even Injustice is guilty of that. But with the possibility of a Crisis on Infinite Earths event, or Blackest Night route in the realm of possibility, it's absolutely possible to see many of these characters return in the future. So, with that said and everything covered here, that has largely been it for this video. But before I do leave you all today, I now pose your old question of, which one did you feel was the most deserved, or the least? And of course, of all of the names I mentioned here, if you had to pick one character, who would you like to see return in the future? Please do comment down below, as I'd love to hear what you have to say, as it's really fun kind of like digging through all of your own thoughts and opinions on this topic, especially the absurd level of characters that are dead in this universe. But until the next one, everyone, that has been it for me. So as always, take care, and I'll catch you in the next one.